please welcome the Becket Fund's Executive Director, Kristina Arriaga, here with The Atlantic's Emma Green.
From the break, it's great to be here with Kristina, who is the executive director of the Becket Fund. For those of you who aren't in the religious liberty litigation world in Washington, the Becket Fund is largely known for a couple of high-profile cases recently. Hobby Lobby, which was a Supreme Court decision concerning birth control and religious conscience of privately held companies in 2014 was the Becket Fund, and then another case called the Little Sisters of the Poor, which again had to do with birth control and the Affordable Care Act. But we are not here to talk about birth control. We're here to talk about LGBT rights and religious liberty. So my opening question to you is, why should we be talking about religious liberty when we're talking about LGBTQ rights?
I think they're in the same plane. And as a matter of fact, I think we're in a time of crisis. I think we're at a time that we're all feeling a lot of anxiety. And I think protecting religious liberty protects, and rights of conscience protects all of us. I'm a Latina. My husband's a Native American. I'm the daughter of immigrants. We are by no means a perfect country. And we've seen many crises, but I also think I'm very optimistic about American people. And I think that it is precisely at times of crises that we come to great decisions about human rights issues. And if I could tell you, one of my favorite moments in American history is in 1943, at the height of World War II. We were interning Japanese, which was very bad. We were turning away hundreds of thousands of Jews that were coming to the shore to seek refuge. And the Jehovah's Witnesses refused to salute the flag or say the Pledge of Allegiance. In a famous case called Barnett that came before the Supreme Court, a lot of Americans thought they were not patriotic. I mean, after all, they were sending their husbands and sons to World War II. And the Supreme Court said that the right to have a different opinion about things that don't matter is really only a shadow of true freedom, that the test of the substance of freedom is the ability to have very different opinions about the heart of issues that are in the realm of existence at the time. And I think we're in that moment right now again. And that's why we at Becket defend all religious traditions. And I think we also have a lot of lessons to learn from the LGBTQ movement and the Obergefell decision in that realm.
So this is something that many people in this room, and certainly others in the United States, may have as an assumption, which is that religious liberty, as it's used as a term by some, is really a code word for discrimination. You'll see this in news reports, people putting quotes around religious liberty or so-called religious liberty. This is often in reference to legislation that's come through in Indiana, for example, a couple springs ago, or the fight that's been going on in North Carolina. So in what ways would you debunk that, or perhaps argue against it, that religious liberty is in fact not just code for discrimination against LGBT people?
Religious liberty is the ability to search for the truth, and wherever that path takes you, to organize religion or to no religion at all, you should be free to do so. The government has no role in that path. Unfortunately, a million bad things have been, I'm Cuban, I exaggerated, I don't know if it's exactly a million, but many bad things have been done in the name of religion, which makes sometimes religious liberty the eccentric uncle of the human rights family, right? It's being weaponized. But for instance, we at Becket defend religious members of the LGBTQ community. Before Obergefell, there was a pastor who wanted to marry same-sex couples, and the state threatened to fine him. And we said, no, the government should have no role in the path for truth for that community. And I think protecting conscience rights for the LGBTQ community, for the religious community, go hand in hand. They're not against each other. There doesn't necessarily need to be a conflict. Doug Laycock, who's a professor at University of Virginia, who's for same-sex marriage, speaks about this really eloquently. He says that religious minorities and sexual minorities have mutually reinforceable claims against larger society. And that's important to remember. Identity issues are at the core of who we are, and we should not have government regulation over them without being very careful about the cost of doing that.
So some of these questions, as you've alluded to, can become really hard when you're talking about them in concrete terms. The example that is often used is the cake baker who is religious and doesn't necessarily want to make a cake for a gay couple. This is an issue on which Becket Fund would likely, depending on what state you're in, be on the side of the religious cake baker, which is having the ability within a certain realm to turn away the gay couple. So talk about that, the way in which you navigate the potential hurt feelings, the feeling of insult in a fundamental way that a gay couple might have coming into that bakery.
Yeah, this is a really important issue and one that has, unfortunately, we are talking past each other instead of talking to each other. We're not having productive dialogues. We're both offended and hurt, and as a result, we're really not listening to each other. That is, the cake baker case is very famous. We defend the rights of a Colorado gay cake baker who makes marijuana-themed cakes. I don't defend the rights of my children going in there or having any of that cake, in case they're watching.
And just tell people, for those who don't know what that is. Kind of cake.
Oh, it's people don't know what marijuana is? Oh. Okay. So I thought I was the least hip person in this green room. So these are cakes made with pot, with weed. Is that the correct term?
Yeah, that's hip. Very hip, very hip.
Yeah. They lead you to a certain state of ecstasy, I suppose, after you eat one. I've never had one, but someone showed up and said, will you make a cake with biblical passages condemning homosexuality? And the gay cake baker said, no, I won't. And we at Becket believe that our country is stronger when we have diverse views and we have the space to have those diverse views. Many companies are now refusing to make Confederate flags on cakes or to print Confederate flags, paper with Confederate flags. And we believe it's their right to run their business according to their conscience. This is what makes this country truly exceptional.
So you're saying that your position would be to defend both types of cake bakers, both the LGBT cake baker who doesn't want to have the biblical verse, but then also the Christian cake baker who doesn't necessarily want to bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Absolutely. We believe that it's a very serious matter to turn someone away, but it's also a very serious matter to say, I cannot participate in a religious ceremony. In the case of Baronelle Stutzman, which is the case that has made, in Colorado, that has made a lot of headlines. She was a flower maker. She had loved and given and made flower arrangements for this gay couple. And when they came, she said, I love you. You can get flowers on the back. I cannot make the arrangements, because she thought it was her mode of expression. She felt she could not participate in that religious ceremony. And it's true that the same-sex couple may have suffered dignitary harm. The court only ruled that they lost $7.91 in gas money. The flowers were made by another florist for free. She's lost her livelihood, a business that she had grown for nothing. And I think in America, we're not a place where people lose their livelihood simply because they have an unpopular opinion. We at Becket do not believe religious liberty, conscience rights, identity rights, none of those should be a popularity contest. And I can't say that because I was not popular in high school. We all remember that, right? And I think part of the reason that I'm so invested in this is to make sure that even people with unpopular views have a right to express those views.
So let's talk about another area of conflict. Something that's been in the news a lot has been transgender rights, especially when it comes to public accommodations. The way this has often been translated is bathrooms. In North Carolina, there's the famous bathroom bill, HB 2, which has to do with sort of state and local regulations around who can use what types of public bathroom facilities. So in what way do you all think about these kinds of claims about transgender rights, especially to use, for example, a bathroom in a public park or a bathroom in a building that they would go into or a store, and how that might conflict with religious views or maybe not conflict with religious views?
I've violated HB 2 law many times because I have often gone to the men's restroom when the ladies' restroom line is too long, right? Some of these things I think there was an overreaction. What the law in North Carolina says is that you must go into the bathroom of your birth gender, if I may summarize it. And this has put a lot of people in a very uncomfortable situation, because if you have young kids, you want to accompany them to the restroom. Your only choice is to go to the bathroom of the opposite gender. Well, so be it. But I also understand the dignity of the transgender person who doesn't want to go to the wrong bathroom. But this is a place where we need to have an honest conversation about this. This is going to translate into a lot of broad policies that may not be good for our country. For instance, college campuses. 1 in 5 women in college report to be sexually assaulted. It is not the fault of the transgender, it's not the fault of all men, it's not the fault of the bathroom policies, but certainly they want to be in a locker room or in a bathroom where they feel entirely safe. So if they're approached by someone who outwardly looks like a male, this person cannot even express fear or anxiety. I also think that these are issues that are best resolved by communities. I do not think we needed a state law declaring all bathrooms had to be in a certain gender space. And I also think that passing the Department of Justice had an overreach in declaring that everyone had to go to the bathroom of their declared gender.
So we're going to talk about what the new administration might mean for some of the issues that you work on. But one of the big cases that you all have taken up recently has to do with medical care and transgender people. Sort of a long story short, the Department of Health and Human Services has been refining and revising the way that it thinks about gender identity and sexual orientation in terms of how it's already written into federal law and what that means for healthcare providers and the services that they have to provide to transgender people, gay people. So you all have taken up cases of doctors who feel as though the federal government is putting them into a position where they might have to provide care to transgender people that they don't feel confident or don't feel is part of what they would provide medical expertise or medical recommendation to do. Talk a little bit about that and that negotiation that you all have been doing and trying to figure out that level of transgender rights.
Every single medical doctor and hospital we represent takes loving care of transgender people. They have absolutely no issues with taking care of anyone in the LGBTQ community. And in fact, if any member of any community comes in with needing an emergency procedure, doctors should not be accommodated, right? They need to tend to the patient. So I want to make sure that is clear. What Health and Human Services did is they issued a 300-page regulation forcing all private doctors and private health insurance companies to cover for children transgender transition services. So what this means, if a child comes to a medical doctor with a slip from a psychologist saying, I have gender dysphoria and I want to start the transition process, the doctor has to start performing those services, even if the doctor is not in agreement with the statement, meaning my medical judgment is that you should give it a year, or these procedures are harmful, I don't want to perform them, or removing healthy organs. Right now may be a bad decision. Over 94% of children who have gender dysphoria end up being either gay kids or heterosexual kids when they enter their teenage years. These procedures are permanent, and I'm sure I'll get a question on this.
Yeah, for those of you who are making little noises, definitely hit us. We're coming next to the questions, so please hit us.
It's also these decisions that doctors feel should be made between the doctors and the families. The fact that there's a government bureaucrat coming into this decision and saying you must perform these procedures, even if you've never performed these procedures before, is something that a lot of medical doctors feel uncomfortable doing. And what this does is that if the doctor, for instance, performs hysterectomies on women because they're oncologists, they must now perform them on children if they've never done it before. Now, what's important to explain here is that the government knows these procedures are harmful because it does not require its own insurance programs, Medicare, Medicaid, or TRICARE, to abide by the same requirements because they have been proven to be harmful. They're only forcing private doctors and private health insurances to cover these procedures.
So we're going to go to questions. So if you do have a question, go ahead and do a signal, and
So I
they'll
do
come
want to.
down.
I do want to say something. I met David Isai in the green room. I'm a huge fan. And as soon as I was asked, "What are you here to talk about?" In the religious liberty, someone sighed behind me. So be gentle on me. I'm happy to talk about this. Anyway,
So this is just a quick question to get in, which I think will actually be helpful in framing before we go into questions. So a lot of what you're describing is federal regulation that's issued by departments in the federal government that is open to interpretation, partially because this is a new area of law, and partially because the litigation hasn't happened. So you have given one interpretation of what the HHS regulations mean. There are other advocates who give other interpretations of how that might be enforced. And so all of this is to ask a final question, which is, looking ahead to a totally new administration, how will some of the legal issues that you all take up in litigation perhaps shift?
We are completely unsure. I was one of those people who predicted Trump wouldn't make it past the primaries. And so I think we were all very surprised, but we hope that he will take the following position, that in this live and let live society and great exceptional country of ours, it's terrific to have people from all races, all sexual orientations, all backgrounds, all socioeconomic backgrounds participate in the public square, and to have space for all of those. And I think we can do that.
Great. All right, let's take a question.
Sure. Hello, my name is Rod. Let me stand up. Hello, my name is Rod. And the question I have for you is, particularly when it comes to religious freedom and LGBT plaintiffs or whatever, how much do you balance religious freedom with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, especially if it may be in a community where there are not a whole lot of LGBT resources and services?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we believe that both have mutually reinforceable claims against larger society. We've had cases, for instance, as I mentioned, in the South, where there were not a lot of LGBTQ or progressive churches, and we protected this church precisely because they wanted to marry same-sex couples. Does that answer your question, or do you have a more specific question in mind?
Well, let's move on to another one. We can do a follow-up in a second. Yeah, so another question. Over in the back, yeah.
Hello. So my name is Preston Mitchum. Thank you for being here, and I'm sure what may be a tough crowd. So my direct question to you is, can you kind of go over again the goal of the Becket Fund? And the reason why I asked that is because you just said that there's mutually enforceable and exclusive rights. I disagree completely. The role of religion has imposed and oppressed a lot of marginalized communities. So when I hear things like the Confederate flag, when I hear things like a gay baker and who they may want to, in your case, I would presume, discriminate against someone, those things are not mutually exclusive, because you have an instance where someone is part of a marginalized group, and in a group where someone has usually kind of imposed their religious viewpoints onto others for centuries. So for you, where does the mutually enforceable agreement kind of come in, and when are you and you all may recognize that those who are going to continuously be discriminated against are those who are also claiming to help?
We believe everyone should be able to live according to their conscience. We believe that everyone should be able to be their genuine selves without being afraid or getting hurt or being discriminated against simply because of their identity. But in this country, when there are conflicts between those two identities, one side does not automatically win. The LGBTQ community has suffered greatly. I'm going to say that again. The LGBTQ community has suffered greatly. And that has to be acknowledged. But there have been religious minorities who have suffered greatly. Later on today, we're going to have Secretary Fanning. We sort of sued them. I hope I don't run into him in the green room. He's the Secretary of the Army. He's going to talk about inclusivity. However, the Army refuses to issue permanent exemptions to Sikhs who want to serve in the military while keeping their beard and their turban. people in the military who grow beard for medical reasons are allowed to serve in the military. Why is it different if you grow it for a religious reason? So I think it's important to acknowledge that there has been a lot of hurt on both sides, but I think it's also time to have an honest dialogue of how we can all live together. And look, we're painting cartoons of each other in a certain way, right? LGBTQ people come in all races, from all socioeconomic backgrounds. The same thing with religious people. Religious people come from different sexual orientations, and they come from different races and different socioeconomic backgrounds. And we have managed to be the most religiously diverse country in the world for a long time, and we should continue to do so.
All right, let's take another question. Over here, yeah.
Hi, my name is Kelly. First off, thank you for joining the dialogue. I realize it's difficult. Your statistic of 94%, I guess, regret for transgender, I question that. I've never heard that before. The statistic that I do know is 41% of transgender people do attempt suicide sometime in their lives. That's an important thing not to exclude. When you discuss getting trans care through the medical community for trans people.
So do you have a question?
And so the question, I guess, would be that what would protect us from the religious views of a doctor when there's no other doctors available to provide transgender services?
Well, thank you. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your courage. None of our clients, none of our doctors will refuse treatment to a transgender person. They will take care of their cancer. They will take care of their flu. They will assist them in any way. The only thing that certain doctors will not perform are the transition procedures, which are determined harmful by the government itself. All we're saying is the doctor should be able to use best medical judgment when making these decisions, not the government.
Another question up here in the back.
Hi, yes, my name is Carl. Thank you again for being part of the conversation. I also know it's difficult. I'm going to speak as the chair of the American Medical Association LGBTQ Advisory Committee, which advises the Board of Trustees of the American Medical Association, which has, over the past decade, included more LGBTQ positive policies, especially around what we declare as medically necessary, and having advised the government on how to approach the transgender issue regarding insurance coverage in Medicare and Medicaid. I do want to point out the statistic you brought up. The statistic you brought up is not peer-reviewed. It is not true. Also, I would also ask then, much like this was brought up, how are we, as a profession, supposed to stand by and allow members of our profession to discriminate? When, as a doctor, you take an oath to take care of everybody. When you don't know something, you learn about it, and nobody, and the government, nobody's forcing a scalpel. Nobody's forcing anybody to give medications. They are saying, you should not discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So my question is, how do you provide protections to a profession that is supposed to be governing itself and has been already around this topic and has been doing so progressively over the past decade?
Quick answer.
Thank you. And actually, I would love to talk to you afterwards, because if any of our information is not accurate, I will stand corrected. And now, you mentioned that you advise Medicare and Medicaid on which services to cover. It's understanding from the 300-page reg that Medicare and TRICARE, none of those, and TRICARE, by the way, is the health insurance for the largest employer in the United States, the U.S. military, that they're not required to cover these services. Is that not true?
So I'd say this is a conversation for later, and this is a very important one.
I was told not to get into the weeds, and I did.
So, I mean, I will say, and just in closing, I think that's what's tough about this conversation, is that a lot of it actually has to do with extremely complicated medical ethics questions, legal questions. There are interpretations that different groups have, and a lot of it needs to be sort of adjudicated in that detailed space. But we appreciate you being part of the conversation, appreciate all of your questions and challenges.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.